As someone who is running a primarily RPG-centric YouTube channel, it felt a bit fitting to me that maybe the first video game that I review here should be one of the first JRPGs ever made, Dragon Quest. I'm trying to make my way through the whole series right now, and so far all I've finished is 1, 2, and 3. Of what I've played, I've had a good time. I just wouldn't put these games in my favorite games of all time list. Now don't get me wrong, I have nothing but the utmost respect for the series. I mean, we wouldn't have a lot of the best games that we have out right now if it weren't for Dragon Quest. Series like Final Fantasy, Metal Gear Solid, Kingdom Hearts, I mean, you name it. If it's an RPG, it probably wouldn't be here today if it weren't for Dragon Quest. So before we jump into what I want to be just a casual discussion and review of my personal experience with the first Dragon Quest game, it feels important to me that we first go through the development history of the game and the minds who created it. So Dragon Quest was originally developed by a team called Chunsoft. If that name sounds familiar to you, it's because today they are most widely known for their Zero Escape series, Danganronpa, and they also created the entire Mystery Dungeon franchise, as well as the first 5 Dragon Quest games. In 1983, Enix kicked off their video game publishing legacy by hosting an event called the First Game Hobby Program Contest. This contest was held mainly so that Enix could find developers and programmers to sign on to the company. The contest had a top prize of 1 million yen, which is roughly 5,000 USD, and you had the opportunity to get your video game published by the company. 13 games in total were chosen to be published, and this was a pretty wide variety of games for the company. One of the winners was a video game called Love Match Tennis, created by a man named Yuji Horii. At the time of submitting Love Match Tennis, Yuji Horii was working as a column writer for Shonen Jump, widely known today as the Japanese manga magazine publisher. Knowing that he wanted to be a video game developer, he saw the First Game Hobby Program Contest as a way to get his foot in the door. Winning this contest is what solidified Yuji Horii's desire to create video games, and this is actually the event that kickstarted the man that we know today as the father of Dragon Quest. But the history of Dragon Quest can't just start and end with Yuji Horii, because there's another man who helped develop these first couple of games in the series, and he can't go without being mentioned, and that is Koichi Nakamura. This guy also won a publishing opportunity at the exact same Enix contest with his game, Door Door. Both him and Yuji Horii co-developed the first 5 Dragon Quest games. But after the release of Dragon Quest V, Nakamura stepped away from Enix and has continued to work as the active president of Chunsoft, while Yuji Horii has continued to work on every Dragon Quest game to date. There's actually one more game that Horii made before he made Dragon Quest, and that was the Portopia Serial Murder Case. ファミリーコンピューター初のアドベンチャーゲーム。あるよを掘った密室事件。次々と消されていく容疑者たち。ポートピア連続殺人事件。11月29日新発売。Unlike Love Match Tennis, this game was a detective adventure game that had a strong focus on the story with branching dialogue choices and plot twists. This game is commonly considered today to be the very first detective adventure game. This game, along with Super Mario Bros., was actually one of the video games that inspired the Metal Gear Solid creator Hideo Kojima to enter the video games industry. It's actually documented as well that it was one of the very first games that Eiji Aonuma ever played, and Eiji Aonuma has went on to become the director of the Legend of Zelda series, starting with Ocarina of Time. Needless to say, Yuji Horii was coming out the gates swinging at an early start. After creating the Portopia Serial Murder Case, Yuji Horii decided that he wanted to make an introductory RPG for a much wider audience. Inspired by games like Ultima and Wizardry and even his own games, he decided that he wanted to continue to make games with a heavy emphasis on storytelling. So to appeal to a larger audience, manga artist and creator of Dragon Ball, Akira Toriyama, was hired to design all of the artwork for the game. Koichi Sugiyama was also hired to compose the music, but at this time, his credits mostly just consisted of Japanese television show scores. Dragon Quest was released on May 27th in 1986 in Japan on the Famicom, also known as the NES. Thanks to the advertising efforts of Shonen Jump magazine, the game was a commercial success. It sold over 1.5 million copies. 3 years later, in August of 1989, we finally got it here in America as Dragon Warrior instead of Dragon Quest. The name change was due to copyright concerns because there was already a tabletop role-playing game called Dragon Quest. Through a subscription campaign by Nintendo Power Magazine, the game sold about 500,000 copies. That's not terrible for the time that it came out, but it wasn't nearly as popular here in the States as it was in Japan. Also, when the game was released here in America, it was about $50, and if you were to equate that with modern inflation, that's about $110. So the game wasn't cheap back then. So as is common with a lot of older games like this, Dragon Quest received a lot of remakes and ports over the years. Some of the more notable re-releases include the Super Nintendo version, which was a Japan exclusive. We also got the Game Boy Color version, which was bundled with Dragon Quest I and II. And we even got an Android and iOS version, which was basically a complete overhaul of the original game, just on Android and iOS. The most recent port that we've got is the 2019 Nintendo Switch port, which is essentially the Android and iOS version with a few changes. There were many things that Dragon Quest did to revolutionize the video game industry. There was even a point in time where you could confidently say that it was one of a kind. Today, that statement doesn't quite hold true. Dragon Quest itself has grown not only just in its audience, but in the scope of their games, and arguably much better games from other developers have come out over the many years that take direct inspiration from Dragon Quest. I myself only played Dragon Quest for the first time this past year, so this isn't going to be a review of what it was like to play it back when it came out, and it's not going to be a review of just playing the NES copy today. This is going to be a review of the Switch port and what it's like to play Dragon Quest as it is today. But before I tell you my thoughts on Dragon Quest, I want to know your thoughts. Please go in the comments below and tell me what you thought of Dragon Quest. What was the version of the game that you played? How was your experience? I want to know your mini review in the comments below. I want to talk about this game with you guys. Go ahead and also just leave the video a like. That's been helping me out with the algorithm and stuff like that. So go ahead and hit the like button. Also go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification bell as well. I'm going to be more active on YouTube, reviews, reactions, rankings, things like that. So if you want to be notified whenever I post a new video, hit the notification bell now. So I want to start off by talking about the good. I want to talk about just the things that I liked about the game. And if you know me and you know my love of music in my video games, this is one of the first things that hopped out to me is the completely reorchestrated soundtrack. The soundtrack here it's fine. I mean, there are some pretty good songs. There are some songs that kind of get on my nerves, but ultimately, every song in here has been reworked by an orchestra, and it sounds awesome. It sounds really good, especially when you go ahead and you compare it to the old, 8-bit, the NES music. I really appreciated just having an updated soundtrack to listen to. Another thing that hopped out to me just as soon as I started playing the game was just how fast and easy the combat is. As soon as you start the game and you're on that overworld map, you're walking around and then, an enemy encounter, and then just boom. I mean, there's no fluff. You just start the battle. The enemy's right there, and it's like, what are you going to do? You're going to attack? You're going to use an item? You're going to run away? It's so fast. It's very easy. This really is like the groundwork, the bare minimum of just action in an RPG. It's so easy. It's the easiest thing to get used to. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you need to grind, it's not going to be that hard. I mean, like I said, it's so fast. Another thing that I noticed that I greatly appreciate more and more over the years is the low encounter rate. as far as I'm aware, the encounter rate in this game is significantly lower than in the original NES version or other re-releases of the game. And what I mean by encounter rate, if you don't know or you haven't played the game, whenever you're walking around, this is a random encounter, system. As you're walking around in the field or in dungeons and stuff like that, you can run into enemies and you won't see them coming. It's all random. Back on the NES, I think it was like you couldn't take more than 5 steps or something without jumping into a random battle. Thankfully, you can actually make some progress in this game. You can actually start walking around and not, just be thrown into a battle. So I really appreciate that more and more as I get older. So this one's kind of cool, and maybe someone will care about this. Maybe nobody will care about this. But for me, as soon as you start the game, right after you exit the castle and you enter the world map for the first time, as soon as you get out on your own and you can explore for the very first time, the first thing that you see in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen is the final dungeon. You see your goal, your destination. The main goal of this game is to go to the Dragon Lord's castle and defeat the Dragon Lord. And there it is. I mean, that's the castle right there on the bottom of the screen. And, if you play a game like Breath of the Wild, this is another thing that some games are doing, modernly today. They're letting you know immediately your goal. This game doesn't. I mean, you have to meet certain conditions to get there. It's not like Legend of Zelda where you can just straight up go there immediately if you want to, but you can at least see your final destination. And I don't know, I think this is also the case for the NES version as well. And the fact that they were thinking about that sort of thing back then, I don't know, it just makes me happy. I like it. And speaking of the story, one thing that I do like about this game, this is this is like an original JRPG. You're getting your toes wet into a JRPG. This is an old school game. It's short. Like, it's a really short game, especially when you compare it to the standards of other JRPGs. This game can be beaten, I think it's like anywhere between like 5 and 10 hours, depending on, how you decide to play the game. It's a short game. It's short. It's sweet. You can blow through this game like in a day or a weekend at most. So I appreciate that going into this game. But also on top of the story, another very cool thing that this game did that I was pretty surprised at, and I think I actually did this on accident, but there is some optional story stuff here. I mean, it's commonplace now for a game to have side quests and things like that and alternate endings. But to go back and see that the original Dragon Quest actually did have, I think it's a few different alternate endings. There is a princess to save, and you would think, it's an RPG. It's like one of the first JRPGs. You play as a knight. You're tasked by a kingdom to go save the world. Of course, there should be a princess to go save. That's just common thinking nowadays. But the princess in this game is completely optional. You just kind of find her in a dungeon. I think you can talk to some NPCs, and they give you some sort of insight onto where exactly to go to find her and stuff like that. But you can go and you can beat the game and not save the princess, and that will give you a different ending. You actually have a different ending to this game if you don't save the princess. So I don't know. I just really appreciate that. So even though there were definitely some good things I liked about the game, it almost kind of feels like with every good thing that they put into the game, there's almost, I don't know, there's something to kind of counteract that good. Like, for instance, now that we kind of moved into the mixed portion of this video, one thing that I liked, but I'm kind of mixed about, I love Akira Toriyama. I like the designs that he does for all of the manga, all the anime, all the Dragon Quest games. But in this game, because there's just such an emphasis on pixel art in the game, like all of the towns, all of the characters, all of the landscapes, all this stuff, it's all pixel art. But then you jump into battles, and even though I like the portraits, like I like the art pieces for the setting that they have that are hand drawn, the enemy design it just feels a little, they feel like they kind of stick out. They stand out like a sore thumb because they're not pixelated, which they used to be. I almost, every now and then I will look at comparison footage of enemy designs from the older ports and remakes and remasters and stuff, and then I'll compare them here, and even, yeah, sure, they're clean, they're HD, but I don't know, something about this style of just the clean image on top of this game that's pixel art, it doesn't really work for me. Another thing that I do like, whenever video games do this, I like whenever a fantasy story goes kind of intense with the old Elizabethan dialogue. I think that it's really good. It drives home the setting that we're in this video game. The thing that I don't like is there's just so much, like every single time, every time that you talk to a character in this game, I swear, it's like 3 or 4, pages of dialogue that you have to click through. And even though it's nice to some degree, it's like, man, at a certain point, you're just like, okay, I don't even want to talk to anybody in this town because I know that I'm just going to be clicking through, and they're just going to say a bunch of stuff that I may or may not even understand. And along with that, the way that these older games are structured, you have to talk to characters. You have to know where to go by talking to the characters. And so even though on the plus side, I think that the game is easy to follow, like the story is not hard to understand, navigating your character through the world, it's all fairly simplistic. But the moment that you realize, oh, I don't know where I'm going, probably because a person was supposed to tell me where I'm supposed to go, but now I have no idea, I don't know where to go, you realize, oh, it's because I didn't talk to anybody, and you didn't want to talk to anybody because you just know that they're just going to talk and talk and talk in this old Elizabethan style language. So that was definitely a mixed aspect for me. And as I mentioned earlier, yeah, the combat is fast. It's really easy. But the part that I mentioned with the grinding, even though grinding is something that you can easily get done, something that kind of rubbed me wrong was just the fact that the best equipment for your character comes from the gold, the currency that you win from these battles. It's a little frustrating whenever, you're playing an RPG and you level up your character and your stats go up. But realistically, I mean, if you want to get stronger, you have to buy stronger weapons. If you want to take more damage, you have to buy more equipment that gives you more defense and things like that. I mean, the purchasing equipment is a big part of this game, and in order to do that, you have to grind for a lot of money because things are expensive in this game. So that's kind of a mixed aspect for me. It's just all of the grinding for all of the money that you have to spend. The world map is cool. I mean, for the time that it was, I mean, it's easy to follow, like I said, but at the same time, it just feels a little bit bland. Whenever your character is kind of walking around, you find yourself just moving across the entire map so fast, and really it's just some towns and maybe some caves every now and then, but ultimately the world map just feels very small. It's definitely, I mean, of course, this is the first time that we're having a world map in any sort of video game, so to speak. But nonetheless, playing it today, you just can't help but feel, man, this map is incredibly lackluster. The last thing that I'm mixed on here is just the story is as generic as it gets. And I know, like I said, first game or first JRPG, first time we're really trying all of this stuff. At the same time, playing it today, I mean, you're not going to be playing Dragon Quest I for the story. The original 3 games do make up a trilogy, and the events that happen in this game, they're important to the story as a whole, I guess. But at the same time, the story is essentially you go and you're tasked to go save the princess and to go defeat the Dragon Lord. You go and you fight the Dragon Lord, and what's nice is, you know, you have a choice. You can actually choose to either follow him or kill him. So that's another cool aspect as far as the decision making goes, and you know, alternate endings and things like that. But that's it. I mean, that's really the story. There's some really cool stuff that you can find kind of in the hidden aspects of the game, going in the dungeons and finding out things about the mythical legendary hero Erdrick. But other than that, I mean, you don't really find out much about him. In later games, you find out more about Erdrick. But in this game, I don't know. It's like I said, this is just the most generic that you can get with a fantasy story. So moving on from my mixed feelings, we're just going to go right into the bad. And right off the bat, man, there is something that Square has been doing with a lot of these older ports and remasters that I hate. I mean, I'm telling you, like, I almost like will just not even finish a game nowadays if it has this sort of font. And that's the issue. It's the font. You know, you're playing this game, and this kind of goes hand in hand too with what I was saying with, you know, I like the Akira Toriyama artwork, but for some reason it just sticks out in a really weird way over all of this, you know, pixel art style. So whenever you're playing this game and you're looking at the font and the menus and the dialogue, like, sure, it's easy to read because it's just the most standard font that you could possibly use. But at the same time, I would hope for something, you know, akin to the, you know, classic Super Nintendo style text, you know, some pixel text. It's stuff like this that modern Square-Enix has been doing, where it's, you know, modders can easily fix this issue. But for some reason, Square-Enix doesn't want to at least give us like a secondary option to change the font if we want to. It's frustrating, and I hate it. And then just kind of talking about aesthetics here, especially whenever you compare the character sprites to the Android and iOS version. Like I said, there's a little bit of change that they put into the Switch version, and it's not always for the better. If you look at the sprites at the Nintendo Switch version versus the sprites that are on the mobile versions, maybe this might just be my opinion, but I feel like the sprite work in the Switch version, like, the characters just look so bad. They're a little bit more rounded out, and yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of this aesthetic with the sort of round. It's like they want to make this. They want to put out this pixel art game, but they want to make little changes here and there to make it feel like they don't want to make a pixel art game. They want to make it like a big HD brand new game, and it's like, well, then just make a brand new HD game. Don't change up little aspects of the pixel art for no reason, it seems. So I don't like that at all. And then finally, I mean, this is probably the one that everybody can kind of agree with whenever they're playing this game, but that is that the frame rate is just so unbelievably unstable. It's very choppy. If you're just sitting there looking at the screen and not much is happening, everything looks fine, you know, but whenever your character starts moving around on the screen and, you know, you're going into battles and stuff and you're watching those frames, I mean, man, it just becomes abundantly clear that they did not optimize the frame rate in this game. And you're looking at, you know, you're looking at other games that the Switch can handle, and you're just thinking, why am I playing an old 1980s RPG at like 20 frames a second on a brand new console? So that's really it, you know. That's as far as the things go that I really hated about the game. It's that stuff right there. All in all, my general thoughts on Dragon Quest I is that I think it's a competently made game. It's the first of its kind when it came out, and it's not the first of its kind today, as you can clearly see. I think it does a lot of good things. It does a lot of things that I think are not so great. But all in all, if this isn't a game that you've never played before, or you're just interested in the history of RPGs, you want to go back to the roots, I mean, this is a cheap game on the Nintendo Switch. I think it's like $5 at the highest price. And whenever you're getting anywhere between 5 to 10 hours of gameplay, you know, to go through this piece of history, so to speak, I think it's worth your time. I think it's worth your money. I would go ahead and just say that this is like a you know, if I were to give a rating to it, I would say this is like a 6.5 out of 10. It's a little above average, especially for what the game is when it came out. But you know, I think it's got its flaws, of course, and you know, it's got things that are commendable. So go ahead and check out the game if you haven't played it yet. But that's going to do it for my review of Dragon Quest I. Like I said earlier, I am really curious to hear what your thoughts and your opinions are on this video game. Go ahead and leave in the comment below what you thought about this game, and if there's anything that, you know, you have for me, maybe something that I wasn't privy to that maybe I can talk about in a later episode, go ahead and just let me know. I'm open to all criticism and things like that. So go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, like I mentioned earlier too, hit the notification bell so that you're notified whenever I put out new videos, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.